My twin vanished on a Tuesday. By Friday, I was wearing his name like a costume and walking down an aisle toward three of the most dangerous alphas in the country. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody even checked if I was him. The thing about being a twin is that people assume you come as a set. Same face, same scent, same story. What they never tell you is that when the world decides it only needs one of you, the other one just becomes a spare. My name is Eli Calloway, not Evan, not the other one. Eli. And for 22 years, I watched my twin brother Evan collect every piece of love our family had to offer while I stood in the background, quiet and invisible, wondering if anyone would notice if I just walked away. Spoiler alert, they wouldn't have. But I didn't walk away. I stayed. I folded myself smaller and smaller. I learned to take up less space, less air, less everything. I became the kind of person who existed in the margins of his own life. Until the morning Evan disappeared and suddenly, devastatingly, I became the most important person in the room. Not because they loved me, because I looked exactly like him. I found out about the marriage the same way I found out about most things in the Calloway house. By accident, while everyone else was panicking too loudly to remember I was standing right there. It was early morning in our family's estate just outside of Hartford, Connecticut. One of those gray October mornings where the sky looks like it can't decide whether to rain or just give up entirely. I'd come downstairs for coffee, in wearing an oversized University of Connecticut hoodie and the kind of exhausted expression that said, "I have not slept, and I will not be held responsible for my words." My mother was on the phone, pacing the marble foyer in heels she hadn't taken off from the night before. My father stood by the window with a glass of something that was definitely not orange juice, staring at the driveway like he was waiting for the world to end. Neither of them looked at me. Classic. I poured my coffee, leaned against the kitchen island, and that's when it happened. That low, electric hum behind my temples that meant my telepathy was picking up something loud. I'd had the ability since I was 16. A quiet, terrifying gift that nobody knew about. I couldn't turn it off. Not completely. It was less like a switch and more like a radio that occasionally picked up stations I never asked for. Strong emotions made it louder. Panic made it practically deafening. And right now, my father's thoughts were so loud I nearly spilled my coffee. The Voss brothers will withdraw the contract if we don't deliver. $3 billion. The alliance, everything. Evan is gone and the wedding is in 4 days. I set my mug down very slowly. 4 days. My mother turned, finally saw me standing there, and the expression on her face moved through about 6 emotions in under 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, relief, guilt, more calculation, 0 apology. "Eli," she said carefully, "sit down." "I just woke up," I said. "I haven't finished my coffee. Whatever you're about to say, I need caffeine first." "Eli?" "Mom." "Coffee, 2 minutes." She waited. I drank. I needed those 2 minutes because I'd already heard everything inside their heads, and I was using that time to decide whether to laugh, cry, or simply walk out the front door and never return. My father turned from the window. His voice had that rehearsed steadiness he used in boardrooms, the tone that meant he'd already made a decision, and this conversation was just a formality. "Your brother is gone," he said. "We don't know where. We don't know when he's coming back." "Okay," I said. "The Voss wedding is Saturday." "I know." "The contract." "I know about that too," I said quietly. A pause. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. "How does he know?" "Because, Mom, I can hear you both thinking at full volume, and neither of you has ever once considered that the quiet son might actually be paying attention." But I didn't say that. I just looked at my father and waited for him to finish the sentence he'd been building since the moment I walked in. He straightened his shoulders. "You and Evan are identical. Same face, same build. With the right presentation." "No," I said. "Eli, I said no." I picked up my mug again. My hand was steady. I was proud of that. "You want me to walk into a marriage with 3 mafia alphas pretending to be my brother, at a wedding arranged to seal a $3 billion deal. And your opening pitch is, "You and Evan look alike." That's genuinely impressive, Dad. That's a new low even for you. My mother stepped forward. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand perfectly. I finally looked up, meeting her eyes directly. What I'm waiting to hear is the part where any of this considers what's at stake for me. Silence. Long, heavy, telling silence. And that was my answer. I heard it before she even opened her mouth. The thought sitting right at the surface of her mind, clear as a bell. He'll do it. He always does what we need. He never says no when it really matters. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. 22 years, I thought. 22 years, and you still don't know me at all. I opened them. When do I leave? I asked. And that, right there, was the moment my real life began. Not with a choice I made freely, but with one made for me, dressed up to look like love. The Voss triplets were waiting in Newport, and I was walking straight toward them wearing my brother's name and my own breaking heart. God help us all. The drive to Newport took 2 hours. I spent the first 20 minutes staring out the window watching Connecticut blur past in shades of gray and amber, the October trees stripped half bare like they too had been told to show up as something they weren't. My mother had packed Evan's clothes. Let that sink in, not my clothes. Evan's. A whole suitcase of his tailored shirts, his pressed slacks, his cologne. That sharp bergamot and cedar scent that was nothing like mine. Mine was warmer. Quieter. Something between rain-soaked pine and vanilla, which Evan used to say made me smell like a coffee shop, and I used to say made him sound like a snob. I missed him. I hated that I missed him. He'd left me holding the grenade he'd pulled the pin on, and I still missed him like a phantom limb. Typical, I thought, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. Even when you're gone, you're still the interesting one. The family driver, Mr. Pruitt, said nothing the entire ride. His thoughts, unfortunately, were not silent. Poor kid. Doesn't know what he's walking into. Those Voss boys aren't normal alphas. The things I've heard. Mr. Pruitt, I said pleasantly, without turning from the window. Whatever you've heard, please keep it to yourself. I'm trying to maintain a healthy level of denial right now, and you're interfering with that. He went very quiet. Good. Newport in October looked exactly like the kind of place where powerful people made decisions that destroyed other people's lives. Old money architecture, and stone walls along the coastline. The Atlantic sitting gray and restless beyond the mansions like it was personally offended by all of them. The Voss estate sat at the end of a private road lined with iron gates and security cameras, and several very large men who did not smile. The car stopped. A guard leaned down to the window, looked at me, checked a tablet, looked at me again. His thought arrived flat and certain. That's not Evan Calloway. My stomach dropped. Then, just as quickly, the thought shifted. Same face, though. Close enough. Let it be Harlan's problem. He waved us through. I exhaled slowly. Close enough. That was going to be the theme of my life now, apparently. The inside of the Voss estate was the architectural equivalent of a man who wanted you to know, immediately and without question, sought that he could have you removed from the building. High ceilings, dark wood, art on the walls that cost more than most people's houses, hung with the casual arrogance of people who never had to think about price tags. A woman in a gray suit met me at the door. Her name, I pulled from the surface of her mind without trying, was Diana Cho, personal assistant to the Voss family. Her thoughts were crisp and organized like a filing cabinet. Evan Calloway. Omega, 22. The Omega half of the arranged contract. Smaller than I expected. I smiled at her. Diana, right? Thank you for having me. She blinked. I didn't introduce myself. You look like a Diana, I said smoothly. It's a strong name. It suits you. She stared at me for a moment, then made a small note on her tablet and moved on. And I followed her through a hallway that smelled like expensive candles and old money and something else. Something that hit me like a wall 2 steps before I understood what it was. Alpha scent. 3 distinct threads of it woven through the air like weather. The first was cold, almost metallic, like a winter storm rolling in off the coast, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already arrived. The second was darker, warmer but dangerous, like embers you underestimate right before they catch. The third was strange, something layered and complex that I couldn't name yet, sitting underneath the other two like a question I didn't have the answer to. My telepathy hummed. Somewhere in this house, 3 very powerful minds were broadcasting at frequencies I was already starting to feel. I straightened my spine, unadjusted Evan's too stiff collar, and reminded myself of 3 things. 1. I was not afraid. 2. I was the smartest person in any room I walked into because I was the only one who could hear what everyone else was actually thinking. 3. I looked fantastic, even in my brother's clothes, which frankly was an injustice he didn't deserve. Diana stopped in front of a set of double doors, knocked twice, and stepped aside. "They're expecting you," she said. "Of course they are," I murmured. The doors opened, and there they were. 3 men, standing in a line with the kind of effortless, coordinated authority that suggested they'd never once in their lives had to convince anyone they were dangerous. They simply were. Identical faces, but not really. Same bone structure, same dark hair, same sharp jaw. But they wore themselves completely differently, like the same song played in 3 different keys. The one on the left was watching me with cold, flat assessment. No expression, no warmth, just measurement. The one on the right was leaning against the desk with his arms crossed. Something sharp and slightly amused moving behind his eyes, like he'd already found the joke in this situation and was waiting to see if I'd find it too. The one in the center was looking at me with an intensity so focused and so still that every single hair on my arms rose at once. His thought reached me before I could stop it. Quiet, involuntary, confused. That's not Evan. I held his gaze, smiled. "Gentlemen," I said, "I hear we're getting married. 3 alphas, 1 secret, and Eli already knows which one suspects the truth. Which one do you think will figure it out first?" Nobody moved. Not them, not me. The room held its breath like it was waiting to see who would blink first, and I want to be very clear. It was not going to be me. I had spent 22 years being overlooked, underestimated, and emotionally sidelined by people who shared my last name. 3 mafia alphas in expensive suits were not about to break my composure, even if one of them already knew. The one in the center had not looked away from me once. His eyes were dark, the kind of dark that had depth to it, like looking down into water and not being able to see the bottom. His face gave nothing. But his mind was still turning over that single careful thought like a coin he kept flipping and catching. Not Evan. The scent is wrong. Softer. Why is the scent softer? I kept smiling. And the one on the right pushed off the desk and tilted his head, that sharp amusement sharpening further. He had an energy about him like a lit match, contained, but only just. His thought arrived lazy and entertained. He's got nerve, I'll give him that. Pretty too. Different from the photos. Oh, wonderful. I was being assessed like a painting at auction. The one on the left still hadn't moved. His arms were crossed, his expression carved from something colder than stone, and his mind was almost completely quiet. Not empty. Controlled. Whatever he was thinking, he was keeping it locked down with the kind of discipline that took years to build. That one, I decided immediately, was going to be the problem. "Evan Calloway," the man in the center finally said. His voice was low and even. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to fill a room. "You're earlier than expected." "Traffic was light," I said. "Newport cooperated." "Did it?" "Surprisingly, yes." He studied me for another moment. I studied him back. It felt less like an introduction and more like 2 people deciding whether or not to trust each other, which, given the circumstances, was probably accurate. "I'm Harlan Voss," he said. Then he gestured left. Kane. Then right. Reed. Harlan, Kane, Reed. I filed them away instantly, matching names to the impressions already forming in my head. Harlan, center, controlled, dangerous in the quiet way that still water is dangerous, the one who already suspected. Kane, left, colder than January, thoughts locked behind walls I couldn't see over yet. The problem. Reed, right, warm, dangerous, unamused by everything, the kind of person who laughed at funerals not because he didn't feel anything, but because he felt too much and had decided entertainment was safer. Eli, I said. A beat of silence. Reed's eyebrow climbed. Sorry? My name, I said pleasantly. It's Eli, not Evan. The temperature in the room did something interesting. It didn't drop exactly. It sharpened. Harlan went very still. Kane uncrossed his arms slowly. Reed's amusement didn't disappear, but it changed shape, going from casual to focused in under a second. Harlan's thought hit me clean and direct. He just told the truth. Why did he just tell the truth? Eli, Harlan repeated, flat, careful. Evan's twin, I confirmed. The other one. The spare, if you want to be technical about it, which I'd prefer you weren't, but I understand if the situation calls for it. I kept my voice light, conversational, like I was discussing the weather and not the complete dismantling of a $3 billion arranged marriage. Evan is gone. We don't know where. My family panicked, did some very questionable math, and landed on me as the solution. I'm sorry you weren't informed. Frankly, I wasn't either until about 4 hours ago. Reed made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. Kane said nothing. His jaw was set and his thoughts were still locked, and that bothered me more than anything else in this room. Harlan took one slow step forward. My instincts said hold ground. So I did. He stopped 2 feet away from me, close enough that his scent hit me full force. That winter storm coldness with something unexpected underneath it. Something almost like cedar smoke curling at the edges of frost. My telepathy buzzed, picking up the controlled current of his focus like static before lightning. You walked into this house, he said quietly, knowing we'd find out. I walked into this house, I said, equally quiet, because my options were this, or watch my family lose everything and spend the rest of my life being blamed for it. I chose the option where at least I'm in the room when decisions get made about my life. Something moved across his face. Not softness, not yet, but something that wasn't dismissal either. You're not what I expected, he said. No one ever is, I told him. That's usually their first mistake. Behind him, Reed had fully abandoned the pretense of casual amusement. He was watching me with something that looked uncomfortably close to interest. His thought drifted forward, unguarded. I like him. That's inconvenient. And Kane, still silent, still locked, finally looked at me with eyes the color of a sky before a storm. His thought broke through the wall. Just one line. Just enough. He's going to be a disaster. I almost smiled. Probably, I thought back, even though he couldn't hear me. But I'm going to be the most interesting disaster you've ever met. Eli just dropped the truth like a grenade in a quiet room. But Kane still hasn't spoken a single word. Why is he the only one staying silent? What is he hiding? Kane's thought sat in my head like a splinter. He's going to be a disaster. I replayed it once, turned it over, examined it from every angle. Because here is the thing about reading minds. Most people think in feelings first and words second. Emotions arrive before language, raw and unfiltered, and what I'd felt underneath Kane's thought wasn't cold dismissal. It was something closer to bracing, like a man gripping a railing before a wave hits. Interesting. I filed that away carefully and returned my attention to the room, where Harlan was now looking at me with the focused patience of someone who made very large decisions very calmly and was currently in the process of making one. The contract was written for an omega of the Calloway bloodline, he said finally. Not specifically Evan. I blinked. That's either very convenient or very deliberately vague, and I'm not sure which one concerns me more. It means, Reed said from across the room. They're pushing off the desk again and moving with that loose, easy energy that somehow managed to feel both relaxed and predatory at once. That legally and by pack law, you qualify. Lucky me, I said. Depending on how you look at it, Reed agreed, and the smile he gave me was the kind that came with fine print. His thought was still warm, still unguarded in that way that suggested he either didn't bother controlling surface thoughts or simply didn't care who picked them up. Genuinely not upset about this substitution. Evan was boring in every photo. This one has a mouth on him. I had to physically stop myself from responding to that. Harlan clasped his hands behind his back. The wedding proceeds Saturday. That gives us 4 days. 4 days, I repeated. To do what exactly? Bond? Build trust? Plan a future? Develop feelings? That's a tight timeline even for people who actually chose this. To establish terms, Harlan said. House rules, expectations, boundaries. Oh, good, I said. I love boundaries. I have several. Should I start, or would you like to go first? Reed made that almost laugh sound again. Kane's jaw moved slightly, like he was pressing something back behind his teeth. Harlan, to his credit, looked at me with something that might have been the very earliest, most reluctant form of respect. You'll stay here, he said, in the estate, starting tonight. I opened my mouth. Non-negotiable, he added, before I could speak. I closed my mouth, then opened it again. That word is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this relationship, and we've known each other for approximately 7 minutes. 8, Reed offered helpfully. Thank you. Not Reed. Anytime. Harlan's gaze didn't waver. His thought was steady underneath the surface, deliberate and unsettling in its clarity. He needs to be where we can see him. Until we understand what this is. Until we understand what this is. I turned that sentence over in my head while Diana reappeared at the door like she'd been waiting just outside for this exact moment, which she probably had, and announced that my room was ready. My room. In their house. Starting tonight. I looked at the three of them one more time. Harlan, still and watchful. Reed, entertained and calculating behind the warmth. Kane, who had not said a single word this entire time, and whose silence was starting to feel less like disinterest and more like something he was working very hard to maintain. Fine, I said. But I want it on record that I think this is a terrible idea, and when it inevitably gets complicated, I reserve the right to say I told you so. Noted, Harlan said. In writing, I added. Reed actually laughed that time. A real one. Brief and startled out of him like he hadn't expected it. The sound was warm, and it hit the room differently than anything else had, loosening something in the air by about 3 degrees. Kane looked at Reed, then at me. His expression didn't change, but his thought did. It cracked open just slightly, like a door that hadn't been latched properly, and what came through wasn't cold assessment or controlled distance. It was something quieter. Something almost involuntary. He laughed. Reed actually laughed. And underneath that, softer still, barely a whisper at the bottom of everything. When did that last happen? I felt that one land somewhere in my chest, gentle and unexpected, like a stone dropped into still water. I didn't let it show. I turned and followed Diana out of the room. Evan's too stiff collar pressing against my throat, my heart doing something complicated and uninvited inside my chest. The hallway stretched ahead of me, long and quiet, and lit by warm sconces that made the dark wood glow amber. Behind me, I heard the low murmur of the brothers' voices starting up again. The deep current of 3 minds I was now apparently going to be living inside of. Diana stopped at a door near the end of the hall, opened it, and stepped aside. The room was large and unreasonably beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic. A king bed with linen the color of storm clouds. And through the air, you threading under the door from somewhere deeper in the house, that triple scent again. Cedar smoke and frost and something I still hadn't named yet. It wrapped around me like something I hadn't asked for and didn't know what to do with. I sat on the edge of the bed, pressed my palms flat against my knees, and said quietly to absolutely no one, "Eli Calloway, what have you gotten yourself into?" The Atlantic offered no answer. Neither did the house. But somewhere down the hall, I heard Kane's voice for the very first time. Low, careful, deliberate. Make sure his windows lock from the inside. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like protection. And somehow that was so much worse. Make sure his windows lock from the inside. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Long enough that the amber light outside my windows shifted, the Atlantic turning from gray to something darker, the kind of deep blue that exists right before the sky decides it is done pretending to be anything other than night. Kane Voss had not spoken a single word directly to me. Not one. He had stood in that room like a mountain that had decided to be disappointed in the weather, arms crossed, jaw set, thoughts locked behind walls I could barely see over. And then, the moment I left, the very first thing out of his mouth was an instruction about my window locks. Not a threat, not a power move. Protection. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes and said, with great feeling, "I am in so much trouble." My telepathy hummed in quiet agreement. I gave myself exactly 10 minutes to spiral. That was my rule. I established at 16 when the voices first started, and I realized that panic, if left unchecked, would simply eat me alive. 10 minutes. Feel everything. Then get up and be functional. The 10 minutes included the following thoughts, in order. Evan was gone, and I had no idea where or why or if he was safe. I was in a mafia estate in Newport with 3 alphas I had met 40 minutes ago. One of them already knew I wasn't who I was supposed to be and had decided to proceed anyway. One of them found me entertaining, which was either good or deeply strategically dangerous. One of them hadn't spoken to me at all and had used his first words to make sure I couldn't be reached from outside. And I, Eli Calloway, certified spare twin and accidental bride, I had agreed to all of this because the alternative was walking away and letting my family burn. 10 minutes ended. I got up, washed my face, looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a steady moment and said, "Okay, new plan. Survive the week, find Evan, get out clean." My reflection looked skeptical. "Stop that," I told it. The knock at my door came quietly, not the sharp, authoritative knock of someone who expected immediate entry. 2 soft taps, then stillness. I crossed the room and opened the door. Reed leaned against the frame with both hands in his pockets, that signature amusement sitting easy on his face. Up close, he was sharper than he'd seemed across the room, something watchful living underneath the warmth, like a fire that looked friendly until you remembered what fire actually did. His thought arrived casual and front-facing, the mental equivalent of a shrug. "Just checking, making sure the replacement Omega hasn't climbed out the window." "The window's locked from the inside," I said. "Apparently." Reed's eyes flickered with something quick and surprised. Then the corner of his mouth pulled up. "You heard that." "Sound carries in old houses," I said pleasantly. He studied me for a second. His thought shifted, dropping half a register. He's sharper than Evan ever was. Evan was polished. This one is actually paying attention. "Hungry?" Reed asked. I considered the question against the backdrop of everything that had happened in the last 6 hours. My twin was missing. I was pretending to be him. I was about to marry 3 men I didn't know by Saturday. Not my entire future had been rerouted by a phone call I hadn't even been part of. "Genuinely starving," I said. "Please tell me there's food in this house that isn't decorative." He laughed again, that same startled warmth from earlier, and pushed off the frame. "Come on." The kitchen was at the back of the estate, massive and well lit, with dark countertops and windows that looked out over a stone patio and the ocean beyond it. It felt different from the rest of the house. Less formal. Like the room the estate used when it wasn't performing. Reed moved through it with the ease of someone who actually used this space, pulling things from the refrigerator without ceremony. His thoughts ran easy and surface level while his hands moved. Left the good coffee on the second shelf. Kane is going to hear us and come down pretending he needs water. I sat at the kitchen island, folded my arms on the counter, and filed that away. So, Reed said, setting a plate in front of me without asking what I wanted, which should have been annoying but was actually just efficient. Eli. That's me. Not Evan. Definitely not Evan. But you're here anyway. Observant, I said. Is that a Voss family trait, or just you? He leaned on the opposite side of the counter, watching me with that focused underneath warmth expression. Why'd you tell us? You could have held the line, played the twin card all the way to Saturday. I picked up the fork he'd set beside the plate. Because it wouldn't have held, I said honestly. Harlan knew inside 30 seconds. And whoever the other one is who keeps his thoughts locked up like a federal vault, he would have gotten there by morning. Reed went very still. His thought came sharp and involuntary. He clocked Kane. How did he clock Kane? Nobody clocks Kane. Lucky guess, I offered. Reed looked at me for a long moment with an expression I couldn't fully read, which was unusual enough that it made the back of my neck prickle. Then, from the doorway behind me, came a voice. Low, careful, deliberate. You said the wrong name at the door. I turned slowly. Kane stood in the kitchen entrance in a dark shirt, arms loose at his sides, watching me with those storm sky eyes. His thought was completely, unnervingly clear. He knew I'd come down. He was waiting. The room went very quiet. Hi, I said. You talk. Kane came downstairs, and Eli was already waiting for him. So who exactly is playing who here? Kane looked at me the way people look at math problems they didn't expect to be complicated. Not angry, not warm. Just that focused, unblinking assessment that made the air between us feel like something with weight and texture. Something you could press your hand against and feel push back. Reed, to his eternal credit, said absolutely nothing. He just picked up his coffee cup and watched us with the quiet delight of a man who had front row seats to something he hadn't paid for. His thought arrived gift-wrapped. This is the most interesting thing that has happened in this house in 3 years. Helpful. Thank you, Reed. You talk, I said again, because apparently that was how my mouth had decided to handle this moment. Kane crossed the kitchen without hurry, pulled out the stool 2 seats down from me, and sat. He didn't look at Reed. He didn't look at the plate in front of me, or the window, or any of the neutral territory a person looks at when they're avoiding something. He looked directly at me, steady and unhurried, like eye contact cost him nothing. You were expecting me, he said. Not a question. Reed mentioned you might come down for water, I said. I just did the math. Something shifted in Kane's expression. Not a smile. More like the idea of a smile passing through and deciding not to land. His thought moved underneath the surface, slower and more deliberate than Reed's quick-running current. He listens past what's said, notices what people don't intend to show. I kept my face neutral and took another bite of food. That's a useful skill, Kane said quietly, for someone walking into a house like this. I'm a useful person, I said. Generally underestimated, frequently underutilized. It's a whole thing. Reed made a sound into his coffee. Kane's gaze stayed on me, turning something over behind those storm sky eyes. The walls were still up, still solid, but there were cracks in them now that hadn't been there in the formal room earlier. Little fractures letting out threads of thought he probably didn't realize were visible. He's not scared. He should be scared. Why isn't he scared? Because fear is exhausting and I have a limited emotional budget, I thought privately. I'm allocating it elsewhere. The contract terms, Kane said, shifting his weight slightly on the stool. Did anyone explain them to you? Harlan said Saturday. That was approximately the full briefing, Of course he did. The flatness in Kane's voice when he said that held something interesting underneath it. Not irritation, exactly. Something older and more tired. His thoughts surfaced briefly. Harlan decides, Reed smooths it over, and I find out what broke afterward. I glanced between them. Reed met my look with a small shrug that confirmed everything without saying anything. So that was the dynamic. Harlan held the authority. Reed held the room. And Kane stood at the edge of both, thinking everything nobody else was saying. Fascinating. Genuinely structurally fascinating. And deeply useful information that I was absolutely going to file away for later. The contract, I said, turning back to Kane, is between the Voss pack and the Calloway bloodline. It binds an omega to the three of you collectively. Pack marriage, shared bond, mutual legal and territorial protection. I paused. I looked it up in the car on the way here. The Wi-Fi was fine. Reed set his cup down. You researched the contract on the drive over. I had 2 hours and a lot of anxiety, I said. Researching things is how I cope. Some people eat their feelings. I read legal documents. Kane blinked. Just once. Slowly. His thought cracked open a little further, something almost startled moving through it. He came in prepared. He walked into this already knowing what he was agreeing to. Then you know, Kane said carefully, what Saturday means, what the bonding ceremony involves. The air in the kitchen shifted slightly, warmer somehow. Or maybe that was just the awareness of what he was actually asking, and the shape of it settling into the room with quiet weight. I put my fork down, looked at him directly. I know what it involves, I said. I also know that nothing happens without consent, because pack law is clear on that point, and I read that part twice. I held his gaze. Is that going to be a problem? Kane said nothing for a moment. The ocean moved outside the windows, steady and dark, waves pulling against the stone patio in that endless, patient rhythm that sounded like breathing. Then Kane said quietly, no. Just that. One word, set down like something solid and meant. His thought followed, low and unguarded in a way I didn't think he intended. He's protecting himself. Smartly. Using the law as a boundary because he doesn't have anything else to use yet. And underneath that, barely audible, the softest current of something that made my chest do that complicated, uninvited thing again. Good. He should protect himself. Someone in this situation should. I stared at the counter for a second, collecting myself. Reed was watching both of us with an expression that had gone from entertained to something quieter, more genuine. His thought was simple and a little raw. Kane just meant that. He actually meant that. The kitchen held all three of us in that warm, unresolved silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. I picked my fork back up. Good, I said, matching Kane's tone exactly, setting the word down the same way he had. Solid, meant. His mouth moved, not a smile. Still not quite that, but close. Dangerously, inconveniently close. Kane just showed his hand without realizing it. And Eli heard every word he didn't say. So why does protection feel more frightening than danger ever did? Dangerously, inconveniently close. I told myself it was nothing. Kane's almost smile was just a muscle movement, a reflex. The kind of involuntary thing a face does when the brain gets surprised and forgets to maintain its default setting of carved granite and controlled distance. It meant nothing. It was nothing. I was absolutely, completely lying to myself. Reed drained the last of his coffee, set the cup down with a soft click, and stretched both arms over his head with the casual ease of someone who had just watched two people have an entire conversation inside a silence and found it thoroughly satisfying. Well, he said pleasantly, this is already more interesting than I expected. Glad I could entertain, I said. Not you have no idea, Reed said, and the warmth in his voice had an edge to it now, something genuine underneath the performance that I caught before he smoothed it back over. His thought ran quick and honest. I expected another Evan, polished and hollow and already calculating his exit. This one is actually here. I looked down at my plate. Actually here. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a diagnosis. Kane stood, pushed his stool back with a quiet scrape against the floor, and moved toward the counter to get what I now understood was the water he had used as a cover story for coming downstairs. He filled a glass, turned, and leaned back against the counter. He was closer than he'd been in the formal room. Not close in the way that meant something yet. Just close in the way that happened naturally in kitchens late at night. It was in small spaces with warm light, when the architecture of a house pushed people together without asking permission. I could smell him from here. That was new information I did not need. His scent was the one I hadn't been able to name earlier, the layered, complex one sitting underneath Reed's ember warmth and Harlan's frost and cedar. Now, with less distance between us, I could finally place it. Dark wood after rain. Something mineral underneath, like river stone warmed by afternoon sun. And at the edges, barely there, something almost sweet. Like the last note of a song you didn't realize you were listening to until it stopped. My telepathy hummed low and warm, which was its extremely unhelpful way of telling me my subconscious had already decided something my conscious mind was still pretending to debate. I stabbed a piece of food with my fork harder than necessary. Reed noticed. Of course Reed noticed. His thought arrived lightly wrapped in amusement. Oh, he smells him. Look at that. Day 1. I was going to develop a migraine from all this unsolicited commentary. The wedding rehearsal is tomorrow morning, Kane said, his voice directed at the middle distance between me and Reed. In that way people talk when they're being informational rather than personal. 9 o'clock. Harlan will walk you through the ceremony structure. Wonderful, I said. I love learning the choreography of my own arranged marriage the day before it happens. We had less than a week ourselves when it was arranged, Reed said. Welcome to the club. I looked at him. Wait, you didn't choose this either? Reed's expression did something complicated. His thought moved in a direction he clearly hadn't intended to open, something old and layered surfacing before he could redirect. Pack alliances don't ask. They assign, even us. He recovered quickly, reshaping his face back into that easy warmth. Pack law, oldest triplet line in New England. The alliance was set before we were 20. He lifted one shoulder. We've had time to adjust. I looked at Kane. Kane said nothing, but his thought, slow and deliberate, offered one honest line. Adjust. That's one word for it. The kitchen went quiet again. And that was the moment it hit me. Not the arranged marriage, not the contract, not the ceremony tomorrow. Something quieter and more devastating than all of that. They hadn't chosen this either. 3 men who ran half the organized territory on the eastern seaboard. And then every single one of them had walked into this the same way I had. Not freely, not fully. Just doing what the structure of their world demanded and building something livable inside the walls they were handed. I didn't know what to do with that. I'd walked in here ready to be strategic, ready to be smart and careful and keep my walls up and find Evan and get out clean. I had a plan. It was a good plan. It had steps. And now I was sitting in a kitchen at midnight with 2 of the 3 men I was marrying in less than 4 days. And one of them had just told me his windows lock from the inside to keep me safe. And the other one had looked at me like I was the first real thing he'd seen walk through the door in years. My plan was taking damage, and I hadn't even been here 12 hours. I set my fork down, pressed both palms flat against the counter, looked at the space between my hands. I want to find my brother, I said quietly. Not to Reed or Kane specifically. Just into the room, where it was true. Before Saturday, I want to know he's safe. Silence. Then Kane set his water glass down and said, with a weight behind it that made the words land differently than they should have from someone who barely knew me. We know. I looked up. His storm sky eyes were steady. His thought was unguarded completely for the first time since I'd arrived, open and clear and carrying something that made the floor feel slightly less solid under my feet. We've already started looking. They were already looking for Evan, before I even asked. So why does that feel less like relief and more like the beginning of something I'm not ready for? We've already started looking. I sat with those 4 words the way you sit with something fragile. Carefully, with both hands. Afraid that if you hold it wrong, it will turn into something else entirely. They had started looking for Evan before I asked. Before I arrived. Before I had given them any reason to extend that kind of consideration toward a person they hadn't known existed until approximately 90 minutes ago. The logical part of my brain, the part that had kept me functional through 22 years of being the overlooked twin, offered a reasonable explanation immediately. The Voss pack needed the Callaway alliance intact. Finding Evan was practical. It was strategic. It protected the contract. That part of my brain was correct. The other part, just the quieter part that lived somewhere behind my sternum and had been very carefully starved of hope for most of my life, said something else entirely. I told that part to sit down and behave. How long? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which I considered a personal victory. How long have you been looking? Since your family contacted us Thursday morning, Kane said. When they told us Evan was gone, Harlan made 2 calls before he made any others. 1 to our legal team, Reed added, and 1 to our search network. Your search network, I repeated. We have resources, Reed said, with the easy understatement of someone describing a swimming pool when they meant an ocean. I looked at Kane. His thought was steady and open, still running that unusual, unguarded current that felt less like a choice and more like something the kitchen's quiet had pulled out of him without permission. He deserves to know we're not his enemy. Not in this. Not in this. I turned that phrase over carefully, examining its edges. Not in this. Which meant there were other things, other territories, other contexts where enemy was still a reasonable word. The mafia world they operated in wasn't a metaphor. The security at the gate, the weight behind Harlan's authority, the way Reed's warmth lived right next to something predatory and sharp. These were real things. This was a real world with real consequences, and I was about to legally bind myself to the center of it. I knew all of that. I had known all of that since the car ride. And somehow, sitting in this kitchen at midnight, it was the not in this that was making my chest feel complicated. Okay, I said quietly. Reed tilted his head. Okay? Okay, I believe you. I looked up and met Kane's eyes directly. Thank you for looking. Kane held my gaze for a moment. His jaw shifted slightly. That small, involuntary movement I was starting to recognize as the thing his face did when something landed differently than he expected. His thought was barely a whisper. He said thank you like he doesn't say it often, like he means it every time. I looked away first. Not because I was retreating, because some thoughts aren't meant to be witnessed, and that one felt private enough that holding eye contact through it felt like trespassing. Reed was watching me with that quieter version of his expression, the one underneath the performance. He pushed off the counter and picked up my empty plate without asking, moved to the sink with the easy domestic familiarity of someone in their own space. Rehearsal at 9, he said, his back to me, voice returning to something lighter. Which means Harlan will be up at 7 running through logistics on a whiteboard like a general preparing for invasion. Does he do that often? I asked. He did it for our first pack meeting when we were 17, Reed said. Color-coded. Laminated. I stared at the back of his head. Laminated. He takes preparation seriously. I'm getting that impression. Kane made a sound, not quite a laugh. Not one either. It was brief and low, and it dissolved back into his usual quiet so fast I almost missed it entirely. Almost. My telepathy caught the tail end of the thought that had produced it, warm and unguarded and gone again in a second. Eli would survive Harlan. Somehow, I think Eli would be fine. I pressed my lips together and looked at the counter. The thing about reading minds was that it was relentless. People thought constantly, messily, honestly, in ways their faces never showed and their mouths never said. I had spent 6 years learning to live inside that noise, building a kind of internal distance between what I heard and what I let myself feel about it. That distance was currently performing terribly. Because here was the truth, the one I'd been circling since the moment I walked through the front door of this estate and got hit with 3 distinct alpha scents and 3 completely different kinds of dangerous. I had come here with a plan. Find a way through Saturday. Find Evan. Get out clean. I had not come here to think Kane Voss had a sound that was almost a laugh. I had not come here to feel something go soft in my chest every time Reed's warmth turned genuine underneath the performance. I had not come here to catalog the exact way Harlan's measured authority carried exhaustion inside it like a stone carried heat. I had not come here to feel anything except strategic. And yet, I stood up from the stool, smoothed Evan's shirt that still sat wrong on my shoulders, and said with every ounce of composure I had available, "I'm going to sleep. Apparently I have a rehearsal at 9. "Eli," Kane said. I stopped. He was looking at me with those storm sky eyes, steady and unhurried, and carrying something I felt before I could name it. "Ah, the door at the end of the hall," he said quietly. "If you hear anything tonight that doesn't sound right, knock." His thought followed, simple and clean and devastating in its honesty. I sleep light. I always have. I stood there for one full breath. "Okay," I said softly, and walked back down the hall toward a room that smelled like all 3 of them. Kane told me to knock if something felt wrong. The problem is, nothing about this feels wrong anymore, and that terrifies me more than any of it did at the start. I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay on top of the storm cloud linen in Evan's clothes, staring at the ceiling while the Atlantic moved outside my windows in that steady, breathing rhythm. And I let myself think the thoughts I'd been holding at arm's length since the moment I walked through the front door. Evan was gone. Maybe running, maybe hiding, maybe doing what Evan had always done, which was making a choice that served himself and leaving the architecture of the fallout for someone else to live inside. Me. It was always me. And the strange, terrible, quietly beautiful thing was that this time, the fallout had a kitchen that smelled like dark wood after rain. It had a man with warm, dangerous eyes who laughed when he didn't mean to. It had someone who checked window locks and said knock if something feels wrong and meant every syllable of both. I pressed one hand flat against my sternum. "Stop it, Eli." My telepathy hummed. It had been doing that all night. Not picking up specific thoughts, the brothers were too far down the hall for that. Just that low, ambient warmth. Like standing near a fireplace in another room and feeling the heat through the wall without seeing the flame. 3 distinct frequencies. All of them present. All of them awake, I realized. None of them sleeping either. The knock at my door came at just past 2 in the morning. Not Reed's easy 2 taps. Not Kane's deliberate quiet. This one was different. 3 precise knocks, measured and unhurried, with the weight of someone who had decided something and arrived having already made peace with the decision. Harlan. I sat up, crossed the room, and opened the door. He stood in the hallway in a dark shirt with the collar undone, looking exactly like a man who had been awake doing calculations since midnight and had arrived at a conclusion that required a conversation he hadn't planned for. His thought reached me the moment the door opened, clear and unguarded in the way that exhaustion stripped everything back to the essential. He deserves to know the truth before Saturday. All of it. I stepped back from the door. He came in, stopped near the window, turned to face me with the Atlantic moving dark and endless behind him. "Sit down," he said. Then quieter. "Please." I sat on the edge of the bed. He stayed standing, which I understood. Some people needed to be upright to say hard things. "Evan didn't disappear," Harlan said. The room went very still. "He left," Harlan continued, his voice carrying that measured steadiness that I now understood cost him something to maintain. "We knew 3 days ago. He contacted us directly, said he wouldn't honor the contract. You said he was leaving the country and the alliance could dissolve for all he cared. I stared at him. My telepathy was absolutely screaming. Not with his thoughts, with mine. 6 years of being the spare. 6 years of watching Evan walk away from things and leave me standing in the wreckage with a broom and a polite expression. 6 years of telling myself it didn't matter, that I didn't mind, that the margins were fine, the margins were enough. He knew, I said. My voice came out very quiet. He knew you'd come to my family. He knew what they'd do. Harlan's jaw tightened. His thoughts surfaced, heavy with something that looked remarkably like guilt. We should have called Eli directly. We should have given him the choice ourselves. Why didn't you? I asked. A pause. There's because the contract mattered more than it should have, Harlan said. And I'm not proud of that. The honesty of it hit me sideways. No deflection, no reframe. Just a man standing at a window at 2 a.m. telling me directly that he had prioritized wrong, and he knew it. I looked at my hands. So what now? I asked. You tell me this, and then what? Saturday still happens? I still walk into a ceremony wearing my brother's rejection like a hand-me-down coat? No, Harlan said. I looked up. He crossed the room and crouched down in front of me, which I had not expected from a man who laminated his meeting agendas, and looked at me at eye level with an expression that had nothing performed about it. Just something raw and tired and real. Saturday happens if you choose it, he said. As yourself. Eli Calloway? Not as a replacement, not as a contract clause. His voice dropped slightly. We're asking you. I'm asking you. His thought was open completely. No walls, no management, just the honest, vulnerable current underneath everything else he was. I want him to stay. Not for the alliance, not for the contract. I want him to stay because he walked into this house knowing the full weight of it and he didn't flinch. My eyes burned. I didn't let them. I had a strict policy about crying in front of people I'd known for less than 24 hours. Reed appeared in the doorway. Then Kane behind him. Nobody had been sleeping. Reed's thought was warm and simple. Tell him yes. Someone tell him yes. Kane said nothing out loud, but his thought, steady and unguarded and carrying that Riverstone warmth I had been trying not to catalog all night, arrived like something inevitable. He already knows our answer. He's known since the kitchen. I looked at all 3 of them. 3 men who hadn't chosen this freely either. 3 men who had started searching for my brother before I arrived, locked my windows from the inside, come downstairs at midnight, and shown up at 2 a.m. to give me back a choice my family had taken from me without blinking. I thought about the margins, about being the spare, about 22 years of folding myself smaller so someone else could take up more space. I thought about a sound that was almost a laugh, about front-facing warmth and ember fire and cedar smoke and dark wood after rain. I pressed both palms flat against my knees. I have conditions, I said. Harlan's mouth moved, almost a smile. Of course you do. I want full transparency about everything. The alliance, the business, whatever you're into. No surprises. Agreed, Harlan said. I want to keep looking for Evan, even after Saturday, even after the contract is signed. He's still my brother. Already ongoing, Kane said quietly from the doorway. I looked at Reed. And you stop thinking so loudly. It's distracting. Reed blinked, then stared at me, then looked at Kane, then back at me. His thought arrived in capital letters, loud enough to practically rattle the windows. Wait. Can he hear us? Good night, Reed, I said. And for the first time since I walked into this house, I smiled. Not the careful, strategic, keeping my walls up version. A real one. The kind that started somewhere behind my sternum where I'd been starving something quiet for years. Our Harlan stood, looked at me for a long moment with those deep, dark eyes, and then did something I genuinely did not expect. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair back from my face. Gentle, deliberate, like a punctuation mark at the end of something that had taken all night to say. His thought was barely a breath. There he is. The real one. Get some sleep, Eli, he said softly. You've got a wedding Saturday. He walked out. Reed followed, still visibly processing, his mind running at approximately 1,000 miles an hour. Kane lingered in the doorway for one moment. His storm sky eyes found mine across the room. No thought this time, just a look that carried everything his silence always held. All that locked, careful depth, cracked open just enough to let the light out. Then he was gone. I lay back on the storm cloud linen, stared at the ceiling, and listened to the Atlantic breathing outside my window. My telepathy settled. Warm. Steady. 3 frequencies down the hall, all of them finally quiet. Not because they were sleeping, because something had been decided. I pressed my hand against my sternum one more time. The spare twin. The forgotten one. The boy who learned to fold himself into margins and call it living. Not anymore, I thought. For the first time in 22 years, the room I was in felt exactly the right size. He came as a replacement. He stayed as himself. And somewhere down the hall, 3 alphas who never chose freely finally had a reason to. This isn't the end of Eli's story. It's the first night of it. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Hit subscribe. The next story drops soon.